I wanted to show how a set of carburetors come apart and get reassembled. This is not a tutorial, but a quick guide on how I disassemble, clean, and reassemble a set of DCNF Webers that go on a Ferrari 308. Our cars tend not to get driven as much as we'd like, and carburetors get clogged whenever modern fuels evaporate in their bowls. A good cleaning is often all it takes to get the cars back into running shape. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment to let me know what you think of these videos that I've been shooting. Thanks for watching.
On this carburetor, there's tiny little flat washers, so I just kind of keep them on the screw, throw them in the little jar for parts washing so I don't lose them. I just go ahead and throw everything in the parts washer. It does such a nice, the ultrasonic cleaner, it does such a nice job. Might as well take all the dirt and grunge and oil off of the screws as well. So on this one, there's a little bracket here for the, this is the rear carburetor on this 308. So it's got the throttle or the choke cable bracket. So you just got to remember which carburetor it came off of and where it goes. You do this long enough, you'll know which one the bracket goes on, but you just kind of have to work it off of there and make sure it goes back to where it was. But that's the choke cable piece that needs to go back on. So there's the top of the carburetor. Once you take that off, we'll deal with that in a second. We'll take the top gasket off. This one looks pretty good. Sometimes what happens is they shrink and they actually will obscure the throat of the carburetor if the gasket shrinks too much. This one looks in pretty good shape, so I'm just going to set that aside. Okay, next step. I mean, you can go either way. There's a bunch of steps you could decide to do. You could take these out, which is the air correctors and main jet. So you have an air corrector at the top that pulls off. Then you have the main jet, and that is pretty tight. This one's pretty tight on there. I'll have to clean it. Maybe there's some trash in there. I'll throw it in the ultrasonic cleaner and try to get that off later, but the tip of it comes off. That's the main jet. Sometimes just cleaning things off will come apart. That comes off. Again, these are really kind of stuck up to find out why. These are the accelerator pump, squirters rather. So that comes off. What you do, there's a couple little gaskets here, but you'll see that there's a little copper gasket. Then, if you hear that, there's a little check ball in there. You want to make sure that that's free. A lot of times the accelerator pumps won't work because there's trash in there and that little ball is. So when everything gets cleaned, you want to make sure that ball is still rattling in there. These are the little squirters. You can see how tiny those little holes are. That's where it squirts down into the throat on your accelerator. And then I can either dump the carburetor over to pull this, but since we're shooting it, I'm going to try to fish the little gasket out of there. It's another, of course, it's probably not cooperating with me here. There it goes. Oh, almost got it. It's just a little copper gasket, which comes out. You just dump it, but fishing that out so you can see what's going on. That's that part. These will come out. All right. When putting it back in, you'll have to notice that one side is a spring and one side is the hole. That's got to line up. obviously, so the venturi works to pull fuel through that hole and down. If I've seen people put them in backwards, and guess what? It won't run right that way. Okay, next step, pull these out. That just comes out. Same thing here. Then what we'll do is we'll pull the idle jets out, and there's one on each side. So these are held in. Well, first off, if you look very closely, I don't know if we can do this with this camera, but this is the idle jet, and there's a number printed on this, and that'll tell you the size of it. Some people will drill out those holes, so you always just want to make sure that it is what it says, but that's the numbers on these are stamped in the side. So there's one on that side, and there's another one on this side. Comes apart. Okay, so what I was saying before is there's a little O-ring in here. Sometimes it comes out with the jet, sometimes it doesn't. Well, there goes my furnace. I don't know if you'll be able to hear me over the furnace running, but there's the other one. Okay, next step is we're going to pull out the choke mechanisms. So the way this is a little C-clip. You press that down and you pop out, or it's not really a C-clip, but it's a spring, kind of has a little gap in there, and all it does is kind of hold it in there with friction. So you got to be careful because that piece comes out. There's a spring, and the other piece comes out after I take the choke mechanism out. But basically just kind of be careful, you know, if you've never done it before, just know that it's spring tension so things don't go flying when you release it. But that little clip comes out, then it's a little retainer that goes in there. Okay, there's a narrow part and a wide part, and it goes in. Just take note and spring. Okay, so the way the choke mechanism, I don't know if you can see that, but those little valves will move up and down depending, you know, on where the choke lever is. So what we first have to do is pull this choke pivot out. That has a kind of a collar on it, so you can't over tighten it. That comes out, this comes out, and the way this releases is there's a little shaped keyhole, so you basically turn it this way and it comes out. Otherwise, when it's in the keyhole and stays in place, it won't come out. So you could just take that out, throw that in a little wash bucket. Okay, so next step is to pull the choke mechanism. So these screws, just make a note that there's a pair of them. There's 1 and 2. So it'll help you when you put the whole thing back together. Oh, almost lost that washer. But these 2 screws are the same length. They go in holding this piece off. This piece pops off, and it's the choke. Now, what I want you to notice, first off, there's a little port gasket here. Carefully pry that off because you don't have to buy a new one if you save it. Now, if you notice, there's 2 tabs here, and when you operate the choke, those tabs will rotate. Those index on these 2 slots. So when you put this back in, you want to make sure that those tabs are lined up so they will move. If you're not careful and those are not lined up and force the thing down, you can bend this tab and you can, you know, end up having it not indexed correctly. So just make a note of that when you're putting everything back together. Okay, now that that's out, these 2 little tabs will come out the top, just like that. That's one. And that's two. All right, we're making a little bit of mess here because there was still some fuel in the bowls. Then what I do is I'll back the idle adjustment screws out. Just a little needle and a spring. Same thing here. Take that out and out like that. All right, and then the next step is to pull out the accelerator pump. So this is, it's very drained. There's 4 screws here. So what I try to do is take it out equally because it's under spring tension. So once I get them backed out a little bit, I'll hold it with my finger. Sometimes the gasket, there's a little rubber diaphragm in here that's kind of stuck to everything and it won't come out. But just in case it does, I'm holding it in place with my finger just so it doesn't fly out. And like I said before, these screws, there's 4 of them and they're different lengths to the ones that came out of here. So just make sure that when you put things back together that you're noticing that you need 4 of the same length screws that go back together for that. Looks like the gasket is holding everything in place. That comes out now, so it's still held. But what we're going to do is we're just going to give it a little tug and it'll pop out. Okay, so what here is behind here is a little spring. It's different from the other 2 springs we pulled out, the little wider, so it's kind of hard to mix those up. And then this is the accelerator pump. Notice that the long end goes inside there and it's very thin and fragile. I don't throw this. I kind of put this to the side. It was new. I know it was replaced because I'd put new ones in, so we don't have to replace it. But that's basically the accelerator pump. You know, Concours wise, this is probably going to be taken out and plated and made into white cad, but we're going to leave it since the rest of the carburetor is pretty nice. So that's basically as far as I take it down. I mean, you could probably go even further. Let's see if these will pop out. These Venturis will sometimes pop out, sometimes not. What I'll do is I'll just leave them in there, put them in the wash tank. Sometimes they'll come out, but they get caught on the burr, but I'll take a look at that later. Anyway, so that's basically the body. So let's put that aside. And then we'll work on the top. So the way the top works is there's a float and there's a needle that kind of like a toilet plunger. You know, the needle moves up and down, and as the float rises and fills with fuel, it plugs up the hole. And I think maybe the easier way is to pop out the little pin. So there's a little brass pin and has a little spreader there that kind of holds it in place. And it just needs to be driven out. So what I usually do is just not held with a lot of force. Let me see if I can get this out. It's coming. There. So it just basically pop that brass rod out, pulls the float out, okay? And then down here is the needle. So the needle basically rides up and down, and as the float acts on it, it shuts the fuel flow off. And that's basically that part. I've got to get a 19mm wrench here to take the filter assembly out. That comes out. Red fiber washer, there's no sense in sending that in through the wash tank. That kind of seals that. We'll put that in there just to clean up the brass. And then here is your little mesh filter. Throw that in the little cup, and that's basically the carb top. So we'll throw that in. I could take this off, but if we're not replacing it, there's no sense in taking it off. It'll just clean up in the ultrasonic cleaner. And there you have it. Let's get it cleaned up. All right, so after the ultrasonic cleaner, you can see how clean this carburetor got. This carburetor is actually really nice because it's actually cleaner than normal. I mean, just simply because I think it comes from a car with very low mileage. So that's why this thing looks brand new. I mean, older carburetors, they tend to get stained. I mean, this stuff is kind of porous, and it tends to get a certain amount of staining that there's really no amount of, unless you know, there's other techniques like vapor blasting and things that clean it up. But this is pretty good result from simple ultrasonic cleaning. So I'm going to start putting it back together. Cleaned all the parts, laid them out, dried them out. So let's start. What I'm going to do is, I guess, let's start with the choke assemblies. They're going to drop right down in there. So I'm going to do that. Put the little springs in. These little collars go in next. Now, these are a little tricky, so you have to push them in. You gotta snap them in, and to just make sure that they seat. Otherwise, they will fly back out before you even know it. I'm just gonna move this back and forth a little bit, make sure it's all the way in. There, you can just feel it going right into that slot, and then that piece moves up and down. Do the same thing here. Put this guy in, get the little clip. Just like that. You can feel that kind of moving freely. Okay, so like I said before, when I'm putting this guy back, get my gasket. Little gasket here. There goes my furnace again. Put that there. What we'll do is, like I said, we're going to make sure that when this goes on, those little tabs are seated so they will move those little pistons up without binding. And if you look over here, I don't know if you can see it in the shot, but there's 2 screws that are the same length and then 4 that are the same length, so don't get them mixed up, because these are for the choke assemblies, and the other 2 that are the same type of screw is for the accelerator pump. So put these 2 in. All right, what's next? Let's do the accelerator pump. So we're going to put this little copper gasket in there. going to put the nozzle in. Then we are going to take, I don't know if you can hear it over the furnace, but a little rattle, make sure that that's working. Blowing a little bit of air just to make sure it's all clean and no residue. What I usually do is check the accelerator pump anyway, so I'm just blowing through with it. But we'll install that, and we will put these guys back. Put these in. Now remember, wait, well, yeah, you can, okay, I almost skipped a step there. Almost thought I did something stupid. Anyway, spring goes on one side. The hole that will allow the main jet to run fuel through it, through the venturi, has to line up. That goes, it will slide in the other way, but it won't work. So do that, same thing. Hole on one side lines up with the hole, spring locates it. So we drop that in. All right. Main jets. What we'll do is we will put making sure there's clean water. I'll put this in here, right there, like that. That's one of them. The other one, same thing. Just want to make sure that all the water's out of it. Snap that in place. The other side of it. Air corrector. I tend to just blow with my mouth just to get the air out of it. Make sure that's all good. Screw that together. That's it. All right. Next step. Let's put the idle jets in. Also, what I tend to do is to make sure, if you look through with up to a light, you should be able to see through that little hole. That's another way to make sure that it's clear. Really tiny little holes. But that will also need to check to make sure that that's not clogged. Same goes to the other side. Goes in there. All right. What else? Now, accelerator pump. So, accelerator pump takes this spring, goes in there, get the diaphragm, put that in. Actually, what I usually do, this is where you wish you had a couple hands, but what I like to do is I like to get these pre-threaded through the holes, because these diaphragms are so thin and delicate that it's really easy to tear the gasket or tear the membrane. So sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's difficult. It depends. I mean, it's kind of like a juggling act to get these through, but I try to get them threaded just simply because I don't want to tear when it doesn't line up right. So I get them started, kind of have to hold all 4 of them in place. And then what I do is I just kind of try to get everything lined up and try to get it all started. That way it doesn't have this problem with cutting the membrane. Let me see if I can get this started. Just gotta feel it out, make sure that it's working right. And that looks pretty good. Okay, so I can feel it going. This is that diaphragm or membrane is Accelerator Pump, and it does 2 things. It seals the body of that pump against the you know, that little lever and everything else is sealed, and then the center of the membrane flexes as you press on the accelerator, and that's what pumps the fuel. And with that little check valve, that little ball that was rattling, that's a check valve, so it allows the fuel to pump through there. So you have to make sure that all those pieces, and if it's leaking at the seal, which is this edge all the way around, it won't pump. If the membrane in the center is cut or torn, it won't pump. If the nozzles are clogged, it won't pump. If the check valve is stuck, it won't pump. So you can hear that. And what I do also is the accelerator kind of runs on that little ramp area. So I put a little bit of lithium grease right on that rub mark. That's it just makes it operate nice and smooth. Doesn't need a lot, just a teeny tiny little spray of it makes that kind of work really nicely. All right, only thing left now is if you look at the leftover parts on the paper towel, the idle screws, or the idle adjustment, or not idle adjustment, but idle mixture screws. So you just turn those. I believe the setting is 1.5 turns out. So what I usually do is I turn them all the way in. It's 1. That's a full turn. Half. Turn this one all the way in. And when it's all the way in, I just go 1, 2, 3. So it's 3.5 turns. 3 turns, that's 1.5 full turns. So now basically the body of the carburetor is installed. Now we have to move to the cap. So we put this guy back in. We get the gasket, that little red gasket, back on this screw. Put that back in. 19 millimeter. All right, now I'm going to put the needle back in for the float. We're going to get our float, set that in place. We're going to get our little brass rod, slide that in, get that lined up. Take a screwdriver and press it so it's flush, comes out the other side. And now we just have to set the float level. So the float level, I wrote it down on my hand, is 48 by 58.5. So basically, when you see that little float traveling up and down, as the float rises, it closes that little needle. There's also a little spring, a ball and a spring So what you have to do is, in order to set the high float level, you have to get it so just as the ball closes, but not where it's compressing the ball, because that's incorrect. So you have to kind of measure it like this. So what I do is I get a caliper, and what I do is I should zero it out, even though it's already set to where I want it. We'll zero it, and we'll eyeball this thing. So from here to there, it's showing 53.7. That's way too low. So what you do is I gotta get needle nose pliers, very primitive, but you just kind of have to squeeze that tab so it closes further. And then we close that gap. 50. So close it a little more. That might have been too much. Let's see what we got here. 49.5, actually not bad. It's actually a little bit more. Let me just see if I can get this eyeballed right. So right about there, 49.82. Okay, so let's go a little more. No, I don't even know if I moved it there. Nope, didn't even move it. Oh, might have done. It always feels like I moved it too much. 48. Oh, we're getting there. I think I'm there. 48. That's where I want to be. Okay, so that's the low, and the high. Although that was the high. The low point is supposed to be 58.5. So just want to make sure I've got the right. The tough thing is I'm trying to do this with the camera and my parallax. So I'm just making sure. See, that's a little 56. So we're going to try to bend that tab, which is kind of hidden behind there. The high one is not as crucial because rarely does the float go all the way down, but 58.38, that's pretty good. So I had what, 58.5? That's good enough. So that's how you set the level, and now we can put the top gasket back on. So we go here. That goes on there like that. Oh, reminds me. One more check. Let's check the accelerator pump. Okay, so we have to check the accelerator pump to make sure we're pumping. See, that's working. Dump the fuel out. Okay, fuel pump works. Because if that doesn't work, you got to take everything apart again to get to it. So it's better to check it right now when everything's apart. I'm going to put everything back down. Put the top screws in. So if you're hearing people talking in the background, I'm actually not at my shop because I have my ultrasonic cleaner stashed at my house in the basement of my house because so much stuff at the shops. I just had this tiny little work area that's clear that I could just do carburetor cleaning and disassembly and assembly. I do that over at my house just simply because it's a nice little setup. I don't have to break it down every time I have other work to do on my workbench. I can have some room, so sometimes, you know, you're going to hear footsteps running around overhead because I'm at my house actually, as opposed to my shop. It just makes it, I just haven't moved everything over there. Kind of like having it all set up here. I have my ultrasonic cleaner in the corner. I've got my sink and everything like that. So, you know, I tend to spread out a little bit. And, you know, that's, so if you're hearing anything, it's because it's in my house as opposed to at my shop. Just makes it easier. But that is basically it. There you go. Do that 4 times and you got a 308 back on the road. Thanks for watching.